All right, let's get started. Can everyone hear me? Yep. All right. So the topic for today is offshore IT strategy. So best practices to enable you to use offshore as a strategic advantage to cut costs, scale faster, and innovate more. So you'll probably be glad to hear there's no Agent Force in this topic. If you wanted to hear Agent Force, I'm sure there's lots outside. Firstly, thank you. Thank you for being here. Last day of Dreamforce. Hope you had a great week so far. I know you probably hung over from last night, so I really appreciate you guys being here. I'm Huang, Vice President for Ksolves India Ltd. I'm an ex-Salesforce and a certified technical architect with 30 different certifications. So this session is sponsored by Ksolves, so I'll just give a quick plug to my employer. We're a global services provider out of India. So this session is really a really condensed summary of all our learnings and experiences over the last 12 years that we've been in business. We've got over 600 people serving countries, 30 different countries globally, with many happy customers. We're a summit partner, an ISV partner, a consulting partner, a product development outsourcer, and an authorized cloud reseller in Salesforce in India. So we do the full gamut of Salesforce services and products. And we're also a public listed company in the NSE BSE. So offshoring, when we think about offshoring like 20 years ago, during the first wave, we think about just cutting costs, shifting all your work overseas in India, in the Philippines, just to reduce your headcounts and your cost of operating. But with that comes some challenges, right? So often there was quality issues, you couldn't trust the outputs, there's communication gaps, or there's cultural misfits. But you fast forward to today, and the pandemic's really changed everything. It's been a turning point. COVID kind of accelerated digital transformation globally and across many different industries, but it's also changed the way we work almost like probably permanently. Now working from home and working remotely is the norm. So it's really blurred the lines between your local teams and your offshore teams. And we've really seen this as a driver of more offshore strategies being employed by companies. So a few reasons for offshore, I'll just go through them quite quickly. We've talked about costs is the obvious one. We've seen some of our customers save between 40 to 70% on their operating costs. And that's because you can just pay for what you use, right? You can scale up or down depending on fluctuations on your demand. And you can't really do that if you're hiring full-time employees. Depending on your local labor laws, like I said, it may be hard to flex and change the shape of your companies. And it can also free up your local teams to move on to kind of more interesting, high value work. And with the right structures in place, that shouldn't come as a compromise. But offshoring, it's not just a cost play. So if cost is kind of all you're looking at getting out of this, there's probably some opportunities that you're missing out on. Offshoring can be a strategic advantage. First, you're opening up your global talent pool. Suddenly, like your access to talent is much, much wider. You've got 24/7 support. So then you can use like the follow the sun model, where like work doesn't have to stop when your day stops, and your distributed teams can continue working as you're sleeping. We talked about rapid scaling, right? When you need to quickly build up your team or quickly build down your team. Access to specialized skills. Now we're seeing like this new, I said I wasn't going to talk about Agent Force, but AI, machine learning, blockchain, sometimes it's really hard to hire these skill sets because they're so new. So having access globally and getting experts in that has that experience from other companies or from other industries really helps, right? Because it's hard to get that quickly and how to build up and train your team quickly. And obviously there's cost control and that's certainty on how much it's going to cost. So offshoring can be an enabler for agility, for speed, and for innovation. You can get these offshore teams to be formed into R&D style pods to do some research and development, for prototyping, for innovation sprints, for hackathons, and access to those skills that I talked about in emerging tech for AI, blockchains, machine learning, data, Tableau, Commerce Cloud, whatever it is that's needed for your business. And success comes from enabling, not restricting your offshore team's voice. Right, so how do you get started? So I'm going to use like this magic quadrants perspective. Along the horizontal axis, you've got business value. So from low business value to high business value. And the vertical axis is internal capability. So how well does your team know that, that skill set? How much experience they have? Again, from low to high. So that low-hanging fruit is on the bottom left, right? This is work that is low business value and your team doesn't really know how to do it. Like why do you want to invest in your team to skill up in this area? This is perfect for offshoring or outsourcing. And you can do that immediately to get efficiencies and scale. Moving on up. So this is where you have high internal capability. Your team's really good at it, or they've got lots of great experience. You've got lots of people who know how to do it, but as low business value. So do you really want your team to be spending a lot of time doing this? If you offshore and outsource this, you can enable your teams to shift more to the right, to work on kind of often more interesting and higher business value type work. So moving to the right, so high business value, low internal capability, right? It's really valuable, more interesting type work, but your team's not really structured for it. And so it may take a while, it may take a while for your team to skill up. And so here's where you want to tap into the experts and the specialized skill sets from other companies, from other partners. And that enables your team to slowly learn from them or from their own training until they get really good at it. And that's the top right quadrant, right? So you then have really high internal capability and your team's working at the right stuff, all the high value work. Why do you want to outsource that? Right? So really you only want to do that side of the quadrant if you need faster speed to market. You need additional bodies on the ground to accelerate, right? To do things quicker. So it kind of makes sense, like when you look at it from kind of with this framework, right? You map your jobs to be done and you see which quadrants that it falls into. And it becomes quite clear, like what you do first, what you do next, and what you can do later. So the different types of resourcing models that you can use. This is probably the easiest and the simplest. You can start with like a staff extension or an augmentation model. And this is really just for adding extra capacity. So you've got your offshore teams or your offshore resources counterparting with your onshore resources. Right? So your onshore guys have an offshore counterpart and they're doing the work and increasing the capacity. You may have one person or two people, but it really increases your efficiency because they can be working when your guys are sleeping. Of course, it carries a little bit of extra management overhead. So your onshore team or that person needs to have additional skills on managing the offshore person. Then moving on, you can have a dedicated team. This is where your offshore team is more independent and they're working kind of semi-autonomously. You have a team leader, an architect, a designer, QA, developers, and they're forming a proper team. And kind of similarly is a project-based model or fixed scope, fixed cost. This is perfect for kind of smaller engagements where your scope is really well defined and you can control that scope, the price, and the timeline. But of course, if everything's all fixed, you're gonna have to have a trade-off on flexibility. So if you've got variances on your requirements, right, that's going to be hard to change. There are change control processes that you can kick in, but then if you have lots of variability, or if your project is longer and it's hard to kind of fix everything, then that's probably not suitable for this. A more complex model is this hybrid model, where you've got skills and you've got a mixture of people, onshore, offshore. You may have some onshore architects, some offshore architects, onshore BAs, offshore BAs, developers, testers. And this is more for kind of complex projects where you've got expertise in different regions, right? It's a bit harder to manage and requires really strong communication and governance. A lot of you may be familiar with the managed service model. This is kind of often used for support, where you've got offshore teams probably looking after your BAU type work, keeping the lights on, looking at tickets, and working on kind of smaller tasks. The last one's not so common, and it's the build, operate, transfer. This is where enterprises or companies want to have an offshore team or an offshore business, but they don't really know how to set it up, right? But eventually they want to own that. So they get a company, a partner to start first, set it up, build that team up and prove it, prove the value, and slowly over time, the company takes over and that becomes a separate entity or subsidiary of their business. This is like a multi-year long-term investment. All right, some pitfalls to avoid. Over-reliance on cost savings. Don't just focus on the costs. Quality and alignment is just as important. And something that I see quite often is people paying for kind of junior, lower level resources, but then expecting kind of architect level outputs, right? And us versus them mentality. That's pretty obvious. Like, you don't want to be creating silos, right? And having the us, our team versus your team, it kind of weakens that collaboration. People don't want to see themselves just as a number or a vendor. You really want to be treated as a person and as a true strategic partner, right? Having this kind of mentality kind of leads to mistrust, miscommunication. People don't want to take accountability. They don't really want to share knowledge, and it slows everything down. Poor documentation. Now, this is probably not, this is probably relevant for everything, not just offshoring, but it becomes amplified with an onshore-offshore model, right? You've got knowledge gaps across your teams. You have dependency on that knowledge on key individuals that know it all, and it really increases your risk for defects, for compliance, for quality, and it slows down your onboarding, and it becomes harder to scale and harder to bring new people on because you got lack of documentation. And similarly, communication gaps, right? There's miss and unclear requirements, slow decision-making, issue resolution, there's critical defects, knowledge gaps because you're not communicating or collaboration properly. So with that, what are some best practices for on the offshore success? So we recommend starting small and starting with a small pilot team. Then you can iterate and scale gradually when you've validated the quality outcomes and the processes of your partner and the cultural fits to your organization. So mitigate that risk. Having strong offshore and onshore governance, right? Communication and collaboration, as we've seen in the last few slides, is key. You can have daily stand-ups, and those agile sprint planning, retrospectives on what went well, what didn't go well, and using effective communication tools and collaboration, right? Like Jira, Slack, Confluence, Hangouts, Teams. Having well-defined roles and responsibilities, clear decision-making authority, who owns what, and then when things go wrong, the escalation paths to take. And avoid micromanagement. You don't want your offshore teams just to be order takers. You need to empower them to have their own critical thinking. Investing in relationships. So treating your offshore partners as real strategic partners. We've had some customers that regularly visit India, and that face-to-face time is super important, right? There's nothing beats kind of meeting someone in person and then forming that relationship. Increases team alignment so that when you go back and you're having these virtual calls, everything becomes easier because you know the person and you know them well. Defining clear expectations. Having clear scope, clear key performance indicators, and clear ownership. And that clarity reduces friction, improves your trust, and ultimately that's what leads to a much, much more productive relationship. Right, so some key takeaways. Some of you may have come a bit late, so you'll get these slides later. And that's the, so you may have missed the jobs to be done matrix, right? That's really key. So use that, map your task to it, and prioritize like what jobs to be outsourcing and what jobs to be keeping locally. Choosing that right resource model. So whether it's staff augmentation, project-based fixed scope, or managed services, pick the one that suits and meets your business. And you can try a few and see which one works for you. So driving value beyond just costs. Focus on other factors like speed, quality, innovation that we talked about. Think globally, right? The offshoring and remote working has removed a lot of barriers, but deliver local outcomes. Right? That global nature is a strength, but ultimately that measure of success is delivering tangible results that you achieve kind of on the ground for your business. And thank you. That brings me to the end of the presentation. Have a great Dreamforce and a last day. And if you want to talk more and you're interested in scaling with offshore, let's discuss how we can build a model that's for your business. And see some of our contact details. You can go to our website or email us and we can talk.